Welcome to the Grange podcast, where we strive to rekindle the spirit of community and belonging. Our mission is simple yet profound: to foster transparent communication and share valuable information that brings us closer together. Join us as we explore stories, insights, and conversations with the intent of building a stronger, more connected community, one episode at a time. Today, my guest is Dwight Morgan. Dwight is a husband, father, veteran, and retired teacher. He was my fourth grade teacher here in Kettle Falls, and I was honored to have him on the podcast today. During our conversation, we discussed Dwight's early life and upbringing, his military service in the Navy, and his career as an educator. Dwight also shares stories of his worldly travels, his passion for hunting and the outdoors, and the value of being a good human. It was a full circle moment for me, having the opportunity to sit down with Dwight after 25 years since being in his class. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. If you find value in our conversation, please help spread the word by sharing this podcast with a friend. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button to be notified when a new episode is released. Anyone interested in coming on the podcast can reach out to the thegrangepodcast at gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. Now, here's my conversation with Dwight Morgan. As I get older, I am realizing that it is becoming more difficult to recall memories and experiences from my childhood. However, there will always be those memories that are burned into me that I hopefully will never forget. I remember being nervous on the first day of school. I remember learning how to write in cursive and developing the signature that I still use today. I remember my teacher setting high academic expectations for me and holding me accountable for my work. I also remember more primitive things, memories of the smell of charcoal, golden brown biscuits being cooked in a Dutch oven, sparks flying after striking my flint and steel, the taste of buffalo tongue, the smell of tanning a deer hide, and all the hard work that went into it. I remember what our wall tent looked like the night of the campout, and the smell of gunpowder the first time I shouldered and shot a 45-70 lever-action rifle. I remember our class photo was taken with a 90 caliber British wall gun lying across our laps, a rifle that we spent most of the year building together as a class, piece by piece. And I still remember that all those valuable lessons were taught to me by my fourth grade teacher, Mr. Morgan. And here joining us today is Dwight Morgan. Mr. Morgan, welcome to the Grange.
Hey, glad to be here. Yeah, Josh. Yeah, I was just working on that wall gun down at the museum.
Were you really?
Just half hour ago.
So it's down there?
Oh, it's down there. Yeah.
Oh, man.
It'll be there.
I should go check that out.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I got a little water damage when we had that broken pipe, and I just kind of refinished it. I didn't refinish the wood much. It kind of looks like it's been on the bottom of the lake now, which it would have been probably in the
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good memories.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, I've started this endeavor of podcasting, and this is our 8th episode, but I think you've been mentioned in over half of them and reflecting. And I don't even, I've had over a dozen people say it would be so great if you could get Mr. Morgan to come on the podcast. And then by happenstance, you gave me a call 2 weeks ago and said that you'd heard the one with Adam Fowler and I, and then were kind enough to come up today. So I can't thank you enough for being here and look forward to this conversation. But I think there's a lot of people that are looking forward to this one.
Oh, I'll be darned. Mean old Mr. Morgan, he's back on the scene.
He's back. But as I was prepping for this, I thought it would be worthwhile. Obviously those memories that I just discussed were very profound to me in my life. But I also realized, that was a 9-month time period, and I was 10 years old. and I've ran into you hit and miss and known you outside of the classroom a bit. But I'd also like to take a minute and just get to know you, the individual, outside of what I've known, just the teacher. So if you wouldn't mind taking a minute and just, tell our audience where you grew up, where you went to high school, and, we can dive into what happened after high school. But I don't know a lot of that. So I'm really intrigued to learn more about what the early days of Mr. Morgan were.
Okay. Well, I grew up south of Seattle in Tukwila. There's a big shopping center there now. It used to be cow pasture and places where we fished for trout in the streams that went along, and the river there, Green River. But I was pretty lucky. We got 4 brothers and 4 sisters, so there's a big mob of us. I was number 2 in line. So
Okay.
some of the younger ones I didn't get a chance to know too much, but fortunately I've got the youngest one living close to where I live now. We, cause mayhem together. But I went to school at Foster School, South Central School District there in the south end of Seattle. And it was a rural town then. Now it's mostly a bedroom community and, light industry.
Okay.
But we roved the woods. And
How many kids are in your senior class?
there was 102.
Okay.
Yeah. And so wasn't huge, but it was a Class A school.
Gotcha.
But
Did you do sports in school?
I never did. I ran track just because the coach would let me run home to get to work, and I ran distance, and I did okay, in my senior year. But my other brothers, they had held some of the state records, I think, for a while.
Wow.
So in distance, Jimmy did, and John, I think. Well, I know he set the school record, and then Jimmy was behind him, and he said, no, Dan was, and then he set the record, and then Jimmy came along and broke the record again. So
cool.
They were all runners.
What did your mom and dad do?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Yep.
And my dad was a truck driver. He hauled malt out of the Rainier Bury for dairy feed.
Okay.
The spent grain after they cook it to make the beer, and it goes into dairy feed. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Produces good milk. It's just like cooked oatmeal, kind of like.
Yeah.
Not fermented, really.
Yep.
Cows liked it when it did get fermented in the pits, but
yeah,
it didn't get them high.
Gotcha.
But we had a big garden, and there's always something to do. That's how my dad kept us out of prison, I think.
Always had a job on
Yeah, we always had a job.
Were you guys on acreage?
Yeah, we had acres.
Okay.
And like I say, we were about 2 miles from school. We walked to school. I could have gone 200 yards and caught a school bus, but God, who want to ride on a sweaty old stinky school bus, every day? And you always had all the neighbors to wave to as you went. They were going to work while you were going to school, and so you knew everybody.
And if I remember correctly, I think you used to tell us it was uphill both ways.
Yeah, it was. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it was all uphill going to school, but going home, you could go fast, and that's probably what you wanted. You could use gravity to your benefit.
What time period is this that you're in high school?
I was 1958 to 62 would be when I was in high school. And, just kind of preceding the Vietnam War, most of my classmates and things that went into the service. There was probably only maybe 10 of them went into the service. They were all involved in that time period for the most part. That's how after I got out of school, I went into the Navy. Was a radioman in the Navy and volunteered for everything. you know? And I would really advise you, if you go into the military, volunteer for everything. God, you'll have so much fun.
Is that right?
You'll have so much more fun than just trying to hide out,
So did you know your senior year that Navy was what was next for you?
Yeah, no, I figured on that. And I laid out the summer and the fall quarter, and I went in the following January, and that gave me a chance to use the whole hunting season. And I did. I started in Great Slave Lake area, Canada, and finished up in Mexico hunting doves.
Awesome.
So it was, and I got some nice animals.
And did hunting for you start at a young age?
Yeah, it started with, I imagine, with we made bows and arrows and stuff, and ran amok in the flooded pastures and stuff. But it was,
was that inspired by your dad?
My dad was a bird hunter, and we hunted deer, and it was more to get the meat. I mean, it wasn't a trophy hunting situation. If you didn't bring home meat, you failed.
For sure.
But we had good access to deer over in that country, and we also hunted down the Blue Mountains along the Snake out of Anatone at a friend of ours' wheat place down there. But I like to bird hunt, and we had a place up on Hood Canal, north of the Hood Canal floating bridge on an island there with lots of sea ducks. They didn't taste very good, but they're lots of targets.
Meat is meat.
Meat's meat.
Yeah.
My mom was pretty good at making casserole and stuff if we brought sea ducks home.
That's great.
Yeah.
What was the entry into the Navy like then? Were you meeting with a recruiter prior to going to boot camp, or how'd you get signed up and get
just
in?
Went down to the recruiter and said, he signed me up, and the guy says, "Oh, good, another fool."
Fresh meat.
Yeah, it was an easy sell, and I went through boot camp in San Diego. Went in January. It was cold weather, wet. You're walking in the rain every day and stuff. And then I went from there. I went to through boot camp, and then into radio school as a radioman.
Was that San Diego as well?
I was in San Diego too. Yeah, I was only about 2 blocks from where my barracks was.
Okay.
Across the grinder, and then I went into I had a chief there, and he says, "Got just a place for you, Morgan," because he was a hunter too, and all the guys talked about was the bad ladies they were chasing on the weekends and how their heads felt on Monday morning, and I was always talking about hunting, and so his family would go out on the weekends camping trips, and I was always included. They said, come on along, and so I just had a really good deal. We camped in the desert down there and stuff, and so it was a different environment for me coming from up where it rained all the time.
For sure, absolutely.
But I had a good time, and then I was signed to commander of the barrier forces in Hawaii. Oh, darn.
Yeah.
And spent that time out at Barbers Point, Hawaii, and then was assigned to a ship with a unit for Vietnam then.
Okay.
And, just like I say, I took full advantage of it. I mean, I went places that no other sailors were going.
Wow.
It was a good deal. It was a good deal.
And was there anything that made you choose Navy over the other branches?
Well, my dad was in the Navy.
Okay.
And I'd been around water, in rowboats ever since I could row. Probably 7 years old. I was in a rowboat, and my folks didn't worry about us being gone. We could go fishing all day and show up just before dark.
Yeah. How was Hawaii?
It was good. I hunted a lot over there. I had friends that had pig dogs. We hunted boar mostly and shot goats. And
okay.
We'd hunt all the ranges over there, and I'd get to different islands and stuff, and hunt there on weekends. We could catch out of Barbers Point. We could get a ride with pilots that were getting flight time in the small beach crafts, and they could land on all these other little strips around, Kauai, Big Island.
Wow.
And so then somebody else would pick me up on the way back on their flight time on Sunday or whenever days I had off. We usually worked 4 and had 3 days off, so you could be pretty savage.
That's a whole different world growing up, on the west side of the state here, and then going to an island. I mean, and you're 19, 20 years old at this point?
I went in at 17. I was still 17 when I went in. So,
okay.
I got out when I was 22.
Yep.
But it was all total adventure. I mean, I would really recommend it. Stay out of the bars, stay away from the bad ladies and things like that.
Yep.
There's so much to do if you're in the military. Get off base. I'd walk out in civilian clothes and, just right into cane fields, start hunting doves.
Well, and you get to see the world that way too, which, growing up in a small rural community, how neat is that? I wish I would have done a little bit more of that too. I was fortunate to go to Montana and then Colorado, but haven't really seen the world. I've been to Canada, that's my only other country, which is pretty similar to here, but I agree that if there are young listeners listening, there's a lot of value when you're 18 to 25 years old. You don't have a ton of responsibility yet, and you should go see the world. Yeah.
Well, I did. I was really lucky that way. And then, of course, when I got out, I had GI Bill for, going to school and things. But I also had a neighbor, one of my buddies, he went to a private school in North Seattle, so he was never around, but his dad did a lot, Carl Lundberg, and geez, we fished everywhere. I mean, like I say, from Northwest Territories to
Wow.
Montana and every place, I was just really lucky. I got to hunt elk, got to hunt deer, birds.
That's great.
It was adventure as a kid. And my dad always said, well, I'm his father and this is his dad. When he'd introduce us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were you able to learn some real life skills as well, through your time in the service?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, it just, we did everything. And being in a small outfit, you had mechanicing to do on things. And, I was being a radio man. I had radio gear to keep track of, the ETs weren't always around. And, we sat and communicated all over the world.
Wow.
From a desk, on a key, da 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 da, and then come up voice. And we had, with the commander of the barrier forces, it was the seaward extension of the dew line. It was the radar picket planes, the old Constellations, the old three-tailed.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that.
Commercial airplanes, the old
okay.
Connies, WV-2s, and then they went to the P-30 Orions, then replaced them. And that was all right in that time period. And I communicated from the ground or from a ship. We had radar picket ships, and we'd go out and do some time on those all the way up into the Alaskan waters. And then we could catch flights out of NAS Barbers Point there with our guys that were working,
Cool.
Send mostly what you're sending were weather messages,
Yeah.
It sucks out here. It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
But the Russian Badgers would come and fly alongside, we'd wave to them and
wow.
Communicate.
And then did you deploy out of Hawaii at all?
About 4 different times to different places. And
all on a ship or a vessel?
Not necessarily. Mostly on ground stations.
Gotcha.
And then we did, training in Okinawa and different places too.
Where were your deployments?
Thailand, Vietnam,
Yeah.
Vung Tau area. I was stationed there for a while. Worked the whole length of Vietnam.
You do any hunting in Vietnam?
Oh yeah, yeah. People don't realize that, but there's hunting there too.
Yeah.
I mean, besides guys that were looking for you,
For sure.
you try to avoid them. Or if you made contact, you made sure they knew you were there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Left an impression.
Yeah.
But there was just a lot of good times. And I got to a number of different island groups, the Marianas and some of those, that were just for a few days, maybe setting up a communication station or practicing on some operation,
Okay.
Like I say, Vietnam was just really getting going when I was there. And so it was a case where, we worked with the Thai guys, the Thai military and things like that. We went over and did operations with them, training exercises, so they understood our communications and how we operated. That's.
How long was your longest deployment?
12 months, I guess.
Yeah. It's a long time.
Yeah. And we moved around during that time. I mean, I didn't have to stay at one site. That was the other thing. Another thing, being in the Navy, you might go out and work off an LSD, a ship. The LSD is a landing ship dock where we take boats up into the ship, and then you'd move down the coast, and then they'd patrol an area where you'd go in and do inshore reconnaissance, creep and peep, and find out what was going on there.
Okay.
And we transported Marines too and inserted them.
Was it a big culture shock going into a different country in a time of war? Like,
sure.
what's that feeling like when you're a young man and land in country and it
didn't bother me, it smells are different, and the food tastes different. And, people kind of look at you, and some of them are friendly, some of them, kind of standoffish. And I understand that. It's like any culture you'd go into.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of good friends over there, and I spent time in the Philippines too.
Okay.
We would deploy for R&R to the Philippines, usually in the Subic Bay area. And I had friends there, got to be good friends with a Filipino dentist, and we hunted pigs every time I showed up.
That's what I was going to ask, what you guys did for fun on R&R, but a lot of hunting still.
Yeah, I did a lot of hunting. I didn't spend any time at bars. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke, so those things didn't
appeal to you?
Anything to me, just walking through town was bad enough. Get out the other side, it was good.
And did they cook, the game that you guys would harvest, did they cook it differently than you were used to?
Everything that we got, whether it was birds or goats or hogs, they cooked. And they cooked them, each place cooked them a little different. Now, a lot of them cooked them in the pits. The pigs are big, so you dropped them in a pit, wrapped them in chicken wire, dropped them in and cooked them, and they fell apart when you came out, but it was all kept inside the wire,
Yep.
Just open them up on a table, and here you come, and people bring salads, sauces, cooked dishes.
Oh, man.
So you got to try a lot of things. We did the same thing in Hawaii. It was every Saturday or Sunday was a luau, on base.
You remember, do you have a favorite meal that sticks out?
Not really.
It was all pretty good
I
eating?
ate everything. I never had much bad. Some of the kimchi and stuff like that, I'm not big on that. Rotten vegetables. That sort of didn't do it for me. But a lot of the stuff was really good.
Yeah.
And you can't beat a slow cooked pig out of a pit.
No.
It just falls apart.
Yeah, man.
Wolf it down. And we usually had a variety of meat because we shot different things. We'd have goats and pigs and deer sometimes all in the same fire. And you never knew who was showing up, but there'd be 60, 80 people there every single time, all the extended family and the guys from the base,
For sure.
show. We were cooking on base most of the time. So,
Yeah.
You had a lot of family show up.
That's
It was a
great.
Big family setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you an outlier with your other service members not drinking and smoking and partaking in that side of things?
You kind of formed groups.
Yeah.
You got maybe alcoholics and they hang out together. And then you got guys like me that we fished, sea fish and hunted. And that was a little group. And then there were other guys that just, they might have gone over to the club and then gone to the library and maybe they went out on town. I had a lot of them come back to me and said, yeah, we met some girls you went to school with. In Hawaii.
Yeah.
I said, oh, who was that? They'd tell me. Then I'd go down and, they were over for a week or a couple of weeks. And I'd go down and visit with them a couple of times. And, so, it was that. And that happened really pretty regular. They said, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Washington State. And they said, we got a guy from Washington State, guy named Morgan, lives south of Seattle. Oh, yeah, I went to school with him. That's how small the world is.
Small world.
Yeah, there's focal points like that. Like you fly west, well, where do you land? You land on a rock out there, and it's called Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're there,
it's
a small area, you might run into somebody,
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's interesting for me to hear, and I'm not a history buff any means, and I don't know all that much. I should know more about the Vietnam time era. But a lot of what I know is, movies, right?
Yeah.
And you don't see the side that you just described, the R&R of hunting and these, gatherings and sharing a meal together. And, you just see the drinking and womanizing part of it.
Well, that doesn't sell. That doesn't sell
For
in the
sure.
theaters. And so you get these psycho movies. I'm telling you, 96% of it's not psycho.
It's all Hollywood.
It's all Hollywood.
Yeah.
They do that, and that's what they think you're supposed to see. So they got to blow things up bigger and, be more badass.
Yep.
It just, most of the guys over there are just having fun. They had and he played a lot of sports. They played football and rugby and had softball games depending on where you were. Every day. You could be involved in something every day. Or you could go to the library and read. I spent a lot of time reading in the library.
Wow.
Barbara's Point, there were some sections. I found sections of books there, one on central BC.
Really?
That was written back in the 20s, 1920 to 1935.
Wow.
God, they were just interesting stories. And they were all fictional, but they were, some guy going out and camping with his Indian buddy, having adventures,
That's great.
And you don't have to be a jerk.
Yeah.
You just don't have to be.
Yep.
And there's I think if you're sober, you have a lot more fun because you see a lot more things.
Yeah.
From what I could see.
And you remember them?
You remember them, sure. And you meet families and you're brought in with them, and it just extends out your whole life settings.
Yeah.
It's not a vicious place at all. It's just fun.
For sure.
And sometimes you'd be singled out. I know I a couple times I was singled out by guys that I always wore a uniform, or 80% of the time I wore my uniform. Well, most guys get into civilian so you don't look like a sailor. You still look like a sailor.
Yeah, you
still
out.
Look like a dog face out there. Yeah, you're still out of the crowd, But I had guys stop, figured they were going to take advantage of you, and found out it didn't work that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then, so towards the end of your military service, had you thought about re-enlisting at all, or did you kind of know going in you were for now?
I wanted to get out and I wanted to be a teacher. That's what I wanted to be.
And you knew that at a young age? Yeah.
And I'd like to say I flew out of Okinawa. We went up to pick up Marines, and I ordered my own flight basically because I was a radioman. I knew I was getting out, and I had orders that were going to be cut, and so I got a plane flight out. Well, we went in and pull off the teletype. I pull off a message: "You've been involuntarily extended for 6 months." I said, "Yeah, right." Went to the XO and said, I was routing the message. I said, "Here's one for you to see." And he said, "Oh, you've been extended, Morgan." I said, "No, I haven't been extended." I said, "I'm starting school the 2nd of January, and this was like the 21st or 22nd.
Oh boy.
And I said, "Well, I'll be gone." He said, "No, you've been extended." I said, "Well, you watch when you pull up the hook, you look over the side, and, we're only a couple hundred yards off Red Beach, you got heading for the beach, He said something about being insubordinate, and he actually called the master at arms. He came in and said, "Morgan, insubordinate?" He was a signal when we worked together, and he said, "I don't know, Morgan." He said, "You're bordering insubordination." The captain came in and said, "Well, he could hear the XO getting louder, and he was getting redder up in his short haircut, He said, "Well, Morgan," he said, "you hit the deck 3 times this last week in helicopters, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, get shot down 3 times. And he said, "Well, Mr. Joy," he said, "put my gig over the side." And they were rigged for sea. He said, "Put my gig over the side." And they took me over, and they actually just nosed up, threw my sea bag off, threw my extra rifles off, threw my fishing gear off, jumped off the boat, shoved them off. They went back to the ship. I walked up about 100 yards to a road, started walking, got about 200 yards, and here comes a deuce and a half, and they go, stop. Guy backs up and says, "Did you jump ship?" The ship was just black smoke blowing out. They were starting to move out,
Yeah.
I said, "Well, not really," but I said, "I got a flight out of Kadena." And he says, "Oh, we're going right by there. Throw your gear in the back."
Wow.
So shoot, they took me right to the gate.
That's a hell of a way to leave country.
Next morning I was out of there, I was on a flight,
Wow.
707, heading back for San Francisco.
And then not much time before you start school.
Yeah, I got discharged on the 31st.
Wow.
Yeah, I was home on the 31st, New Year's Eve.
And so where'd you start college?
Highline Community College, South Seattle.
Okay.
And then after I finished up there, I went to University of Washington.
Okay. And got a teaching degree?
Got a teaching degree,
Yeah. And how was that experience?
It was good.
Yeah.
No, I worked, I worked nights. I was a bartender at Shakey's, a pizza parlor. Worked for, Pacific Car and Foundry, in making Kenworth trucks.
Really?
Stuff like that. Yeah. No, I had 3 or 4 jobs, and they were all good jobs, and
did the GI Bill take care of your tuition?
It did pretty good. In fact, I banked money.
Did you?
Yeah, because I was working I had $4,000 or $5,000 in the bank when I got out of college. Well, most kids don't,
Yeah.
And that, of course, that was a different economic time too.
Mm-hmm.
School was a whole lot cheaper than it is now.
Yeah.
I think $75 would have cost me a quarter at the junior college.
Yep.
And then I was working as a bartender at Shakey's at the time and rented a basement of a lady's house by Saltwater State Park. And, it was good.
Yeah.
It was good. I always laid off. Never went to school during the fall.
Needed that hunting time?
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah.
That might sound crazy, but I made a promise to myself when I was creeping around in a funny place that when I got out of there, I was going to have some time. And it was selfish on my part, I could have gone to school year round. I probably would have, but it was more fun to hunt, And the summer quarter was the shortest quarter. Why wouldn't you go that quarter?
Yeah.
Why would you go the fall quarter, which is a week longer?
Well, and what a great thing too, though, just to carve time out for yourself and do what you enjoy.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught on that hamster wheel of just always doing the next thing, and burnout happens. That's a real thing.
I've never burned out.
Yeah. Well, I think you're onto something. Yeah. I'm taking notes.
Well, I've been on my hands and my knees at the top of a ridge a few times.
Yeah, for sure.
Looking forward to going downhill, but
yeah.
Yeah.
So then you graduate from University of Washington, and then do you land a teaching job shortly after?
I I went to Australia. I taught at the University of New South Wales as an associate professor for one semester, and then I just went walkabout, and
Why Australia?
hadn't seen it.
Just wanted to see
Hadn't
it.
seen it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I worked for RCA Victor there at EMI Electronics in Sydney, building television sets and stereos and stuff, and then worked for St. Regis. They had a building paper plant out at Homebush there. I worked there for a while, and just kept money. I didn't spend much money, tried not to. Of course, you weren't making a lot of money in Australia either. I think my first paycheck was 2 weeks was like $55.
Yep.
It was pretty low wages.
Yeah.
But got enough, and a couple of guys I worked with, we took off. They were from Perth, and we drove around Australia, went down Tasmania, drove up Queensland, cut across the center over to Alice Springs, and then went north to Darwin and around to Brome and down. And Jeff and Dave had worked at different places along, so they knew people all along the way, and we always had a place to stay, and it was just a good tour. And then went from there to New Zealand.
Wow.
And ended up with a job shooting deer from a helicopter in New Zealand. Worked as a fishing guide there.
Wow.
And it was really fun.
I've always wanted to see New Zealand. It seems like that'd be a beautiful place to visit.
The South Island is a beautiful place. Now, I didn't spend much time in the North Island.
Will you pull that mic just a little closer?
Yeah, I liked the country down in the South Island much better.
Yeah.
To me, it was my kind of country, and there was action there that I wouldn't have had as much of in the North Island. And, I got to know a lot of people there too, and just had good time.
Shooting out of the helicopter, was that controlling population, or what was the
It was
intent?
meat hunting.
Okay.
They were knocking down their feral populations, goats, chamois, different kinds of deer. And I was working as a fishing guide at Lake Brenner, and a helicopter came down, and they had a guy that was all busted up. He was a gutter, and they dropped him into the. People think New Zealand's all open country. It's not. The west side is a jungle. It's a flipping jungle. I shot a lot of deer the width of this room.
Wow.
But he got all busted up, and so the ambulance came, and they hauled him away to Greymouth, and the guy says, "Oh, hell no, I got to find another shooter," and that's the guy that owned the lodge. He said, "Well, this guy can shoot." He says, "I never seen a Yank yet that could shoot." And he goes, "Well, I'll tell you what, all the beer you guys can drink tonight if you can beat him." And this was like 11 o'clock in the morning. Well, that was a long period of time till 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, of course, those guys were just like that. They were on that. And so what they didn't know is I just shot Jeff's 270. I just sighted it in that morning.
So
and I was getting groups like a dime.
You were driving tax?
Yeah. And so they took that right away. And I said, "God, Jeff, what are you doing?" I said, "You're going to be wasting your money," because I knew he was betting on me, And he said, "Not to worry." He said, "These guys shoot an FN and it's all shot out." He said, "Heck, if they get a 6-inch group at 100 yards, they think they're doing good, Well, sure enough, 3 shots, man, and it was all over.
Wow.
The guy just gave up, said he's getting on the steps there and said, "Yeah, we're done."
Yeah.
Of course, his friends are all just giving him chin music, for losing all the beer they were going to drink. Well, then I just ran a swab through the gun and was going in, and Jeff comes out and hands me a roll of bills. I said, "What's this for?" He said, "That's your part of the bar bet." So I didn't bet any money. He says, No, that's your part. You did your part."
That's great.
What
270 are you shooting?
I was shooting a Model 54 Winchester. One that predated the Model 70.
So I have 2 pre-64 Model 70s that have been passed down to me, grandfather to dad, and now I have both of them.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty much like the Model 70. It was just the one that predated right up into the 50s. There,
Yeah.
But it was shot. It hadn't been shot out yet. It hadn't been shot much at all, I don't think. But it was pretty easy money.
Yeah. The one that I have, so it was my grandpa and his best friend, a guy named Ed Hall. They both graduated from Inchalim in, I think it was 42 or 41. And once they got back from the war, they bought matching Model 70 270s. And my grandpa ended up with Ed's, and then my dad ended up with both those rifles. And they'd sat for 30 years in his safe, and then they were passed down to me. And I might mispronounce it, but the scope, I believe, is Unerdal.
Unerdal? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's great.
and it's a straight 4-power with just a dot in the center.
Yeah.
I took that thing out of the safe, put 3 shots at 100 yards, tight group, and then actually harvested my first elk with it that fall. This is 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And harvested an elk with that same scope. And I mean, everything turnkey. It was a pretty neat moment for me.
Yeah, we shot the Unerdals on our guns in Vietnam.
Is that right?
Yeah, they're external mounts.
Yep.
You know, I think they changed after we went. They went to internal mounts, I think Redfields, but we had, they were target guns, you know, as such.
For sure.
Yeah.
I was impressed. Like I said, I mean, there's no reason why it wouldn't still shoot well, but just all of that time. And like I said, I got a 1-shot kill on a nice bull elk, which was a pretty cool moment.
Yeah. I still have a Unerdal on a 40X Remington.
Is that right?
Yeah. But
so then you get back from Australia, and then are you teaching now stateside?
Yeah, I went back and got finished up a master's degree.
UW?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I taught 5 years at Brewster, and then I came over here to Kettle Falls.
And how'd you end up in Brewster?
First job I got.
Yeah.
I got married in the intermediate time to my wife, Mimi, and she was a teacher also. And she got a job as a first grade teacher there, and I was teaching 5th and 6th grade and 7th and 8th grade art. And, you know, had a great time. Yeah. And the only reason we came over here, I probably would have stayed in Brewster. I mean, it was a nice place, and people were great. You know, we had a great principal. And my friend Carl Lundberg had a tree farm over here, and he said, well, I'll cut you. He told me earlier when I was in the service, he said, I'll cut your place out for the house, you know, so I got a heck of a view.
Cool.
You know, pretty hard to beat.
Yeah.
Nice area. I enjoyed my time over here too.
For sure.
I like the timber here a lot better. Brewster was a little bare, but you could get to the timber in 10 minutes if you needed to.
Yep. And then how'd you end up in Kettle Falls?
Well, I applied for a job in Colville, and I think they kind of wanted to hire both of us, but they wouldn't let us both be in the same building. And so I came over here and got hired right away. It was mid-year. It was like 1st of January.
Okay.
You know.
And was that as a 4th grade teacher?
It was 7th and 8th grade art, and I had a science class in the high school. And I think they did it. I think they hired me just to keep track on some guys that were going through there about that time.
Okay.
And your dad would know them.
So what year were you hired in Kettle?
It was 78 or 79, somewhere right in there.
Okay. I didn't know you went back that far here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Geez, I'm an old guy, you know.
Yeah.
I'm 80 years old.
Yeah. So then did you teach the remainder in Kettle?
Yeah, I taught. I didn't
leave
to any other place. And I taught at a couple of the universities too. I taught, you know, classes intermittent here and there, science classes and stuff during the summer. But
and then when did you start 4th grade?
Probably after I'd been here about 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you taught that till retirement?
Yeah.
Okay.
I enjoyed 4th and 5th and 6th grade. I really enjoyed 4th and 5th grade. You know, kids come, they got some skills, and you can really, I mean, you can take them a long ways and have, well, you know how much you've been in the class. You could do a lot of things with them, and they're eager. You know, they aren't jaded on school yet, you know. Yep. And it was just, to me, it was just a lot of fun. You know, they had a 10-year-old teaching the class. I mean, what the heck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your teaching style was unique, you know, compared to every other teacher I've had. Did you always include the primitive side of teaching throughout your whole teaching career, or was that something that developed as you came along? You know,
I did pretty much. I did things outdoors. You know, we built, even in junior high and that, we built wood duck houses and bluebird houses and put them up. You know, and that wasn't part of the curriculum. It was just part of science that we did, and then we could band the birds. We had a game agent over at Pateras that would give us the tags, the bands to put on the birds, and we banded hundreds of birds. And, it got kids out doing something else besides an organized ball team or something.
Yeah.
And a lot of those kids actually went on to be outdoors people.
Absolutely.
Girls too.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure the girls weren't better than the boys in a lot of aspects. They didn't come with a bunch of preconceived notions.
Yeah.
And, we shot with the trap teams, and things like that too, So it was really a good thing. We build a gun in class every year.
Yep.
People say, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't have guns in school." No, you can have guns in school. It's right in the law.
Yeah.
You can't bring them for the wrong reasons.
Yep.
Yeah. But why not teach kids responsibility?
Absolutely.
Real responsibility. Not just sit in your class, be responsible at your desk. No. You can have some responsibility. We built knives. We started fires on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Weeks at a time, and if you couldn't get a fire in 10 or 20 seconds, you were a loser.
Yep, for sure. Well, I almost remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, we almost had competitions.
Oh, yeah.
And if you could make a fire, faster than your peers, you got to eat first. Or, there was these little reinforcements or
you got
incentive.
to go out and sit by the fire while you were cooking whatever we were cooking that day. It might be a cake, it might be a chunk of meat.
Yep. So that was, I'm 35 now. And so I was 10 when I was in 4th grade. So it's been a minute.
Yeah.
But I actually was going through some stuff this week and found, for people that are just listening and not audio, I'm holding a deerskin pouch that I learned to sew. That this pouch holds flint and steel that Mr. Morgan taught us, and we became very proficient at using to start a fire. And I still have that, as well as I believe I built this knife in your class.
Yeah, we built a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, these are prized possessions for me. I was holding these last night, going through my stuff and just reminiscing, but it was kind of weird for me now as an adult and a father and, far removed from being a 4th grader. I still, as soon as I pulled this out, I haven't seen this in a while. I'm going to say 10 or 15 years since I've actually pulled it out. And I still have this huge sense of accomplishment that and it's something very small and simple in nature, but when I held it and I could feel it in my hand, I had this pride of I made something, and I don't think I could sew today.
This is commercial leather here, but we brain tanned leather.
Yeah.
And then the kids made their pouches out of the leather they tanned, and it might have been from a roadkill. We even skinned a roadkill at school a couple times on the playground, and it just gives a hands-on thing. And if you can build fire, you can probably make it anywhere.
Yeah.
And the kids got really proficient. Like I say, 10 seconds, a lot of kids could build a fire in 10 seconds. And if you could surely make one in 3 or 4 minutes.
Yep. And I remember I had an old Altoids tin can, and I would keep, tinder in there, char cloth, and tinder, and this is good memories.
Yeah,
and we'd be on the side of the school, just sparking away.
Kids would be out on the playground at recess, and we'd be there making fires. Kids, off fires, so cool.
There's something very primal about fire.
Yeah, it is.
What influenced the teaching style, the primitive side? Did you have a teacher that stuck out to you, or did you just see that there was...
No, I didn't. I had a major in anthropology and minor in education. And everywhere I've been in the world, I've liked the cultures over there. I mean, I really enjoyed them. And I've looked at a lot of primitive cultures, and those things always kind of put me off. I mean, I was a kid. I had a flint and steel when I was a kid, and it was a piece of an old broken file and a piece of white quartz, and I could make char cloth in a tin can, snuff it out, and then when it went out, you had that to start a fire with. And 1 or 2 strikes, and you had caught a spark, and then you could blow, and you had cedar bark that was shredded up, and you had a fire going. And we never had a problem with fire when I was a kid. You know, my folks always said, you know, just do it in the right place. And, you know, only once did we start a grass fire, you know.
Yeah.
And we had it out in pretty short order. But
the value that I remember being in your classroom, you know, reflecting back, school wasn't all that enjoyable for me as far as sitting in a desk and learning modules out of a book. It was hard to stay awake. We were very sedentary, sitting at our desks. We weren't moving. I didn't feel like I was using my brain that much. And like your class to this day, I just remember being so active and hands-on and really feeling inspired, you know, to be able to do things. I think there's value in knowing that you can do something.
Yeah.
And anyone can kind of sit in a desk and just get through the 6-hour day, but not everyone can do what we did in that class.
And you guys put the same time in the desk, but you had something to look forward to.
So I should also say too that your class was also the most academically challenging. I mean, I really felt that you held us to a high expectation, and school had always come first. I mean, let's just get that straight right now. It wasn't that this was a dink-off class. School, you know, our grades came first, and you required a lot of us that way.
And you took field trips based on your grades and stuff after school. If we went out and did something, you competed for those slots. Now, everybody got to go at some time because I could change the rules, you know, a little, but it wasn't all just based on academics. But if you were interested, you could do some things. You got to do some things. And I trusted you. Yeah. I trusted you kids. You know, there were always sharp tools on the bench or whatever we were doing, and, you know, never had any problem.
It seems that it's hard for me to try to connect the dots. It seems that we're so far removed from that now. You know, I have 2 daughters that are 12 and 15, and they've already been through 4th grade, and now they're in 7th and 10th grade. But it's even hard for me to imagine a 10-year-old doing what we did.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just complacency, or, you know, it's just been so far removed, and over time it's the new normal. But I mean, I don't think any of what we've talked about would fly today, you know, and it would probably get your ass put in jail.
I'm in 4th grade classes every now and then, and I do those things. And I still have students from Kettle Falls that are teachers. Denise Stannard, you might know her. I've been in her classroom. They live down here at Peachcrest.
Okay.
And I've been in her class in Walla Walla, you know, and I get to these other classes, and the kids are just thrilled to be doing these things. Whoa, dude, you know, we're cooking something. We got a piece of cow tongue here. We're boiling it up. Oh, what does it taste like? Oh, yeah, man, this is really good.
Yeah.
You know, or you cook a pineapple upside down cake in a Dutch oven, and they get to see, oh, that's how it was done in the old days.
Yeah.
You know?
There's something really nostalgic about all that.
Yeah.
You know, there was this, I remember your Dutch oven being outside. You still the best biscuits I've ever had in my life. I mean, my God, you can cook. Yeah. You know, we ate so good.
You guys were cooking.
We did.
You guys were the guys doing the cooking. I wasn't doing the cooking. You guys are doing the cooking.
That's a good point.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But through your leadership, you know, I just remember it was it was just very empowering to be able to go out and work with your hands and do something, and then see the final product.
Yeah.
You know,
and get to eat it too.
Get to eat it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think that's kind of my goal, was to give you guys a little confidence that, I haven't tried this before, but I could do this.
Yeah.
You know, and I hope it carried on. In fact, I know it has, because I've talked to kids that said, you know, geez, I do all this other stuff now, and I just got started there.
Yep.
There, you know.
I got quite a few of my friends that were either in the class with me or on either side. You know, Adam Fowler was a year ahead of me, and but I mean, we often reminisce about the things that we still enjoy doing are outside and working with our hands. And I think a lot of that interest started in that classroom. And you know, I mean, to this day, a lot of us, I was talking to Nathan Gurman last week.
Oh, Nathan, yeah.
And I mean, he's an avid backcountry hunter, you know, where he actually goes out and sets a spike camp up for 2 or 3 weeks at a time on solo hunts. And, you know, I told him that you were coming on, and he's told me to tell you hello, by the way.
Oh,
but
good.
He goes, you know, that was a lot of the influence. You know, Nathan really found a passion for hunting and being outside, and to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he lives for.
Yeah. What better place there is there to be?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it might be a little miserable at times, but if you know your stuff, you can mitigate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did you ever, when you were teaching, was there ever any, at that time, was there any pushback, or was it encouraged, or, how were you received?
Oh, I had pushback every now and then. And most of the people, it was their kids were just new in my class that day, and we went out and did something. They said, well, we don't want our kids, cutting up animals and things like that, And I said, oh, okay, just give it time, And I don't think I ever had a question by the end of the year at all.
Yeah.
In fact, by the second week, I don't think I did, because kids came home. They'd done something they'd never done each day.
Yep.
Well, you remember that. There was almost something different every week for sure.
Every week, absolutely.
What did you talk about when you got home at dinner?
What we did that day at school.
Yeah. And it was real positive.
Yeah.
Real positive. And I did have a couple times, new principals that said, you can't do this. These kids can't have knives in their desks, And I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they'll still be there tomorrow,
And so that never really grew as far as...
Oh, I've been called to an emergency school board meeting before, and usually it was taken care of in the first 30 seconds. Well, it's going to go on.
Yeah.
Because our kids are in there. That was it. They wanted that,
The community, you had community support.
Oh, the community support was just wonderful here. I can't even begin to tell you. And times that I needed things, community members they'd just show up,
Yeah.
And it might be food for cooking outside or any number of things, or a camp out. We always had somebody that would be around, to stay overnight with the kids.
Yeah.
Girls or boys, we slept out girls one night, boys another night. They just took really, really good care of us.
Yeah.
And I can't say enough about the community. It just was very, very supportive. And I know there's people, badmouth me behind, because I'd hear, it's community's small.
Yep.
But I think over time they pretty much came around in short order.
Yeah. That's that's quite a few years that you were able to do that.
Yeah.
Do you think it would fly today?
Oh yeah, it'd fly today.
Yeah.
No, I would love to. I could be in classes, I'm sure, 3 or 4 days a week.
Yeah.
But it just logistically now, and they keep changing the curriculum. You've seen how it's evolved.
I can't keep up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can still do that, because if you work hard, you can get done with the curriculum and still have time to do other things.
Yeah.
And some of those things might be as valuable as the stuff they've got in the curriculum, or more so.
I would say so, personally speaking.
Yeah, it might keep a kid in education.
Yeah.
Where otherwise he's out finding something else to do.
I saw that even in our class, the kids, that were maybe in the lower half of the class, or were troublemakers, or didn't really care to do, their work. They actually started caring because they wanted to be part of the activity.
Yeah. That was the whole goal of the thing. If it didn't work, like here again, they had a 10-year-old teaching the class.
Yep.
I had an idea what they needed. I watched.
Yeah.
I was watching those kids every minute of every day. Well,
and it seems like there's value, right, in one expectation, but then positive, negative reinforcement. And I feel like that's something that maybe got a bad rap from the time since you've been there, of almost the touchy-feely thing of like everyone, we just can't ruffle feathers. We can't expect too much, and everything's a balance, right?
It is
on some degree,
sure.
but
Sure.
To my point and to your point, I think of what you expected us and believed in what we could do was big stuff,
And I don't think I was ever disappointed.
Is that right?
I'll be honest with you. And I had kids that, I really wondered what they were going to become. Some of the most questionable ones have been the most successful.
Yeah.
Seriously. And I could go into a bunch of names and tell you where they are now, but I'm not going to do that.
Yep.
But have become really, leaders in some capacity.
Yeah.
And some of them you wouldn't have thought, as soon as they got heavy enough, a rope might hang them.
Yeah, for sure.
But just good kids. They just came along and they picked it up, because all of a sudden they knew they could have a goal.
Yeah.
And something maybe they'd never even thought of.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the outdoors stuff that we did. All kinds of aviation, everything, electronics and everything. I mean, that's where they ended up,
Yep.
Yeah. But they found out they could do something.
Well, and I think there's a good lesson there for parents now with, school-aged children is you can push them a little bit, right? And you got to do it the right way. But like when you say that you were, exceeded expectation, what you could expect from a 10-year-old, I think we've forgotten that a little bit as parents in my generation of, no, they can do things. We just have to give them our attention.
Just think of an 80-pound girl with a 4-pound hammer bending hot metal at a forge.
Yeah.
I mean, every time she hit it, her feet came off the floor. I mean, that was a common thing. And craftsmen, they become craftsmen, and it just, I just can't. I was looking through some pictures this morning, I just happened to move some stuff and they were there. I'm kind of cleaning out some stuff. And there were some pictures of the kids working over in the high school shop. Wow. 9 and 10 years old. Yeah. It's probably in November, so some of them would have just turned 10 maybe. Yep. And just everybody's looking, oh boy, this is cool. Yeah.
That's great.
And then they got to take the stuff they made, they got to take it home. Yeah.
Yep. Do you have off the top of your head, one of the, like maybe one of your greatest memories teaching or something that sticks out in particular?
It's just a blur of things that were good.
It was just all good.
The one thing I kind of stands out is one time I came down through the Okanagan Reservation, and right at the mailbox at the school going in there, St. Mary's Mission, there's a kid sitting with his legs crossed with a can in his hand. And I stopped and I went back and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He says, "Oh, hi, Morgan. Hi, Morgan. What you doing, Morgan?" And we ended up driving him down to the store, to get him something to eat. And, he just said, "I had more fun in your class than I had anywhere." Well, shoot, I said, you had to work too. He says, "Yeah, I remember." Oh, one day I walked by his desk and he wasn't working, and I mean, that was around to the classroom, I says, "Hey, John boy, pick up your pencil, man. Time to get going." He goes, "Don't get tense." And I mean, I had to turn away. I mean, I was laughing so hard. "Don't get tense." That was the kid. Wow. And, he just ended up being a real reasonable student, but that wasn't his makeup. School wasn't why he was there. It's because some guy picked him up and threw him on a bus every morning and made sure he got to school. But I remember I took him home from a field trip one time, and he had a banty rooster, and it came flying off the top of his house and lit on the top of his head. He goes, "Oh, this is my rooster," That's just, I mean, they were buddies. Just good. But to see kids like that, just being kids, gosh, that was so fun,
I bet it was rewarding.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I honestly enjoyed it every day, and it wasn't because I was a good teacher. It was because the kids took responsibility and went ahead. And I don't think there were any fifth grade teachers that ever had trouble with my fourth graders.
They were already in line.
Yeah.
Well, and then I remember a handful of the fifth grade students would come back for the camp out.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of as leaders or whatever. Yeah. They looked forward to that. I saw
them again,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's good because those kids were looked up to by those fourth graders then. And there's kids watching. They're watching all the older kids. Mm-hmm. And that kind of responsibility helps a lot. I mean, it saves you a lot of trouble down the line.
Absolutely.
In your community. Yeah. But like I say, I just enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
I did have a note here. Adam and I briefly talked about it, but Fiddlin' Red.
Oh yeah.
What's the update with Fiddlin' Red?
Last I heard, he's in Sandpoint.
Okay.
And I haven't communicated with him for probably 3-4 months.
I found this picture a couple months ago.
Oh, okay.
Fiddlin' Red down at the museum.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was his background? I remember him, he came did he come into class?
Yeah.
And then I also think that we found his canoe one year at our log catch up at China Bend.
Probably.
But I just remember him, and I don't remember all that much, but he was a standout person.
Yeah, he was quite a musician, and he wasn't an outdoors kid at all. I mean, Fiddlin' Red is totally off his thing. You know, he grew up in California.
Is that right?
Yeah. But, you know, he got into the music, and this was an area that really fit his style.
Okay.
You know, and his wife, Patty, at the time, you know, they were good. She was a good singer and a good musician, too. And so they really, between the fiddle and the guitar and the singing, they were quite a show. Really quite a show.
And so that was kind of his MO in the area, was they were musicians, and he was, and then kind of dressed and looked the part of.
They lived in an old shack out on the river, you know, where they lived up there north of Northport. They had a house. It was an old house. It was kind of just up on the edge of the river, and they had their canoe, their dugout tied down on the logs down below, you know, and that's where he was at. There's an old airport up there just north of Northport, and they were on the edge of between there and the river. You know, it was only 100 yards there, but they were right in that section.
Yep, I know where you're talking.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah. And then would he come into class just to kind of show his music? And
he'd come in quite almost every year, and then you know we'd play the fiddle for him and sing some songs, and you know work with the kids a little bit. Yeah, and he did a couple of full school wide, you know, educational things too, like that, you know, but it was because he was such a character and he's dressed like an old mountain man, you know, I mean, they thought that, you know, pretty cool. This guy lives out in the wilderness.
That's what I thought. Yeah, for sure.
And he taught music lessons, you know, in Colville.
Okay.
Stuff. That was his basic income, was music lessons.
Gotcha. Huh.
You know.
And then so after you're done with teaching, you know, into retirement, and I think you still are involved with the historical center. Yeah. But how long have you been part of that?
Oh, shoot. Mid 80s, I guess, when it opened.
Do you remember the powwows and the celebrations down there?
Oh, yeah.
Because I actually have an album over here. I've been going through a lot of my grandma's stuff recently, and she has a ton of photos from that era. Yeah. But I was just really curious, what was that like to attend one of those in person? The pictures look great, but like, I mean, what was that experience?
They still kind of do it. Tribe now is doing a feed across the river in May, and they used to do it at the historical center, and I can see they moved it to their ground, so they've got all control over what went on, you know, and they didn't have to worry about Park Service or anything like that. And it still happens. It'll be happening here, I think the 15th of May or something again this year. It's earlier now. It used to be like at the end of May when the weather was a little warmer. But that was a good time. You know, I mean, they sang their songs and had their music and danced, and you know, people would come around, and you had big dinner for everybody laid out on tables, you know, and it was just, now they have a canoeing in the morning. It's about 9 o'clock or so. The canoes come across from St. Paul's Mission to the tribal side of the river there, and so they have this canoeing, you know, and they go up cooking the food, you know, and get things. But it's a good community thing. Good.
And was that well attended back in the 80s and 90s?
Oh yeah. It's always been well attended.
Is the attendance still up?
It's still up. Yeah, still up.
And then, do I remember correctly too that during drawdown years that there used to be a sweat lodge on the island,
out on the island,
on Hayes Island?
Yeah. The natives always ran one out there.
I remember always crossing the bridge and seeing the setup out there. Yeah, and they would canoe out, right?
Yeah,
and then have a ceremonial sweat lodge.
Yeah.
Have you ever partaken in a sweat lodge?
I have, but not there.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of for them.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, that's it. And you know, that's, I understand that 100%.
Yep,
you know,
for sure.
But I think it's a good thing for their community.
Yeah,
you know. But sweat lodge is pretty good, you know. And of course, being the only white guy in one, you know, they tried to burn you out, you know. And I always tried to be the last guy out. I might have my face down, sucking air off the ground, you know. But they try to get you, you know, gonna get that white guy, you know. And I mean, we laugh. I had a lot of friends like that, you know. I mean, we just had a good time.
Yeah,
you know.
And then, so you're still involved at the historical center, and you guys are actually putting an event on next month. Is that right?
Yeah.
So dive into that a little bit if someone wanted to come and check it out.
It's open to the public, and just keep your eye on the paper. It's, I'd say, like the 15th, 16th, and 17th.
Okay.
Of May? Of May, yeah. Okay. We'll have school kids there the first 2 days. during the day, and then it's for the public on Saturday. And Saturday and Sunday, there'll still be stuff going on Sunday. But it's been a real good thing, I think, for the community, you know.
And what can the community expect if they come down to see? Like, what are the events going on there?
Varies from year to year. You just don't know.
Yeah.
Just don't know. I haven't seen.
But it's kind of a fur trade theme. Is that appropriate or?
Yeah. On Friday evening after the school kids go, you could come down and we'll have fur trading camp. There'll be a bunch of fur trade reenactors down there. And they're good guys. I mean, they'll talk to you and tell you anything you want to know. You know, and they're not lying to you. They know it because they've tried it and done it. Very knowledgeable people from mostly from the Coeur d'Alene area that work with Spokane House in that. But, you know, they do hide tanning, firearms, fire starting, you know, food, collection of food. One gal does, she's quite proficient at the history of the women in the fur trade and does a real nice section. And I'll talk to you all day, whoever shows up at the tent. You know, you can go from one tent to the other and have a nice visit at all of them. And you'll learn something every single place.
Is that right?
Yeah, because it's not stuff that you've read in a book.
Yeah.
You know, it's stuff that really happened in between the lines. And, it's just worth it.
Yeah.
Just worth coming down. But I think it's between the 15th and the 17th, I think, to be going for 3 days.
Cool.
And we always have 6 or 7 schools, their kids come, you know, we might have 1 or 2 grades, middle grades come down and, you know, they go through different stations. I think there's 9 stations there this year. Each one of them, they're doing something different at, you know.
Yeah.
It's a good adventure.
It sounds
and,
like
you know,
it.
You listen to the kids getting on the bus, you know, I'm usually standing there leaning on a smoke pole, you know, watching these guys. Yeah, so you guys be good now, you know, listen to your teachers. You go, yeah, man, this is really cool, you know.
That's great.
And you can just see the wheels turning, you know, oh, you're a mountain man, you know.
Yeah.
I could be a mountain man for sure.
Yep.
And the girl said, yeah, man, those women were really interesting, you know.
Yeah. Wow.
Because, I mean, the fur trade wouldn't have worked without the women. They processed most of the hides.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was a major.
So are you a pretty good history buff of this area during that time period?
Well, I've read whatever I could get my hands on, you know, and like I said, I probably forgot most of it now, you know.
Yeah.
But things come to mind as you're talking to people.
Yeah.
You know.
So I recently, well, it's been a few months, but visited Pia Mission on Kelly Hill and found it would be my great-great-grandparents are buried there. Yeah. And then all the way down to my great-grandmother, she passed when I was 10. And so, and I actually found, it's in that envelope up there, but it's an interview with my great-grandmother that was done with one of the historical museums in Spokane. And she was, I believe she was 89 when they did the interview, and I have the typed version of that.
Oh, cool.
And so she was born in, I believe it was 1908 on Kelly Hill. They actually asked where she was born, and she said Napoleon. And they said, where's Napoleon? And she said, it isn't anymore. But, you know, in that area. So what time period are you starting to see the fur trade, the Hudson's Bay Company, you know, that stuff start to happen in this area?
Well, the first guys were in here were a couple of trappers, and I think it was in like 1792.
Okay.
They came into the Coeur d'Alene area, and from what I can see, they came up around here and then went back up to Ponderay. And it really got going, say 1802, 1804. And then, of course, you had fur posts set up shortly afterwards. And, you know.
So how many different, or I guess what's the geographical radius of, you know, how far out would people come in to partake in trade?
Shoot, from the Rocky Mountains to here.
Wow.
So, you know, 300-400 miles.
And would that also, because the natives then also too would have these big salmon feeds, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
And was that something that would then partake, like, would a fur trade happen once or twice a year? Or, you know, how frequent was that going on?
Usually it came about after the winter harvest. when the things started opening up so you could get through the passes and through the snow.
Yep.
And there's quite a few trails here that go from the Okanagan, and some go clear over to the coast, up the Okanagan. And so you had to get rid of the snow first, or be able to, have it solid enough you could walk on it. So, April, you might see stuff collected. And here, this was a big center here because people came to fish, and so it was a real gathering place for all the tribes in this area, out of Canada and, like I say, clear to Montana.
And was that a friendly gathering with the fur traders and Europeans with the tribes?
Yeah.
Was it a ceremonial thing with everyone, or was there hostility?
I don't know if it was ceremonial necessarily, but it was just like family oriented.
Yeah.
The trappers were aligned with tribes, and your friend might be of the persuasion with the Flatheads.
Yeah.
He was married to a gal down there, so he was part of their tribe. And so you'd have Flatheads show up here, or Nez Perce, and somebody would be married into the Nez Perce tribe. And, you'd trade goods with them. And here they didn't really fight, because why fight?
Yeah.
It's a place to come, you come and find a new girlfriend or find a guy, and you got stuff to trade, and you see your long lost relatives and friends that you've been a stranger with.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And, it was, those gatherings are usually pretty darn peaceful. Now, on the way out, maybe when you got away, you might have got ambushed. That happened a number of times. Too.
Okay.
Trappers and things like that after the things were over or on the way there, they might have got pilfered.
Yeah.
But while they were there, it was usually pretty much taken care of, unless you had whiskey or something involved.
Yeah.
Become obnoxious. Well, that can happen anywhere today.
Still does.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then how long does this period last? Like, when does the Industrial Revolution hit this area? I mean, is that in the early 1900s?
It's actually before then, probably the 1860s. It was, going when the railroads and stuff came in. Then you had more equipment could come in faster than coming on wagon trains and things like that. So late 1840s on, it was really starting to accelerate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when this area maybe started to shift and change with the rest of, I guess, America at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had farming then, farming took over the traditional pasture lands and things like that. And, I think you hear, like out by the mission here and stuff, the school there, and that, that changed. And they broke up areas and tried to get the indigenous people to farm and stuff, and that worked out for some of them, and some of them it didn't.
Yeah.
But then the reservation stuff that all happened,
Yeah.
that just, it's good in some ways and bad in others. You know, it's not all bad or all good for sure.
Yep.
But there were, benefits to people from them.
Yeah.
I remember talking to a guy in the Philippines. We were up in the mountains there hunting pigs with this dentist, and there were some people that only came out a couple times a year. And he was talking to him, and he says, "This is what I was talking to you about." This guy says, he was getting some new knives, and they were stainless steel, so they didn't rust. And he thought, "Oh, this is good. This is good." And he said, "See, that's what we were talking about, And they didn't like the contact necessarily.
Yeah.
But you got some advantages by having something you didn't have to shove in the sand every day to polish the rust off it.
For sure. And then when is, because was there, like the China Bend area, is that correct that there was, Chinese immigrants that had come to pan for gold in that area?
Oh, yeah. No, they were a big factor. And they came, and like I say, the guys that got there first had claims, and then new rush started further north, and the guys bailed out. Well, then they moved in and worked the harder stuff to get, the finer gold and things like that. So the guys come back and they go, "Oh, geez, these guys are getting all the gold." Well, shoot, you left. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
But that's just, those things happen everywhere in every country. I don't care. You go to South America, the story's the same. The people just talk a different language,
Yep, for sure.
And there's a lot of that going on down there now with the gold seeking,
gold, oil, whatever it may be.
Yeah, whatever
right?
it is. There's some natural resource that can be exploited. It might be timber.
Yep.
It could be game.
Yeah.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
But,
that's interesting. I got a few questions for you here towards the end. Since retirement, what has kept you most occupied or busy? How do you treat retirement? What are you doing?
I've been busy all the time.
Yeah.
Don't know what I'm doing all the time. I see my tail a lot going around tight circles.
Yep.
But I get around.
Yeah.
We've got a place like say in Walla Walla, and we got grandkids down there, so they're into sports in high school and college. One plays basketball for Whitman.
Oh, cool.
And the other one's high school, sophomore in high school, and they both played tennis. Good tennis players, good basketball players. And so that's how you get on a college team, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's just been fun following the kids, and got a place here. There's always work to do, and then the hunting season come along, interrupts everything.
You still hunting it as much as you always have?
Yeah. Well,
Very
maybe
good.
not as much. I think somebody keeps jacking up the mountains and putting more dirt under them.
It seems that way. Yeah.
It's a little harder to get to the top.
Yep.
But I enjoy it. And I haven't shot a deer in the last couple of years. It's not that I couldn't have.
Yeah.
I just don't need the meat in the freezer.
Yep. For sure.
But, it's still fun being out there and prowling around. I like to hunt birds. I like to hunt ducks and pheasants and stuff too. So
cool.
You get to go lay out in the field and wait for the ducks to come in.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Do you get to hunt with grandkids at all? Are they into it?
Now they've been pretty much into sports.
Sports takes up a lot of time.
Yeah, the time or two they've been out with me, they've really enjoyed it. But,
yeah.
You got another game tomorrow or the next day, or on the weekend. So I understand that.
For sure.
Yeah. You always hope you get to spend more time with them, but I spend time at their games too. So, it works both ways.
That's great. Yeah. One of the other questions I had, you mentioned earlier that you're 80 years old, and I hope that when I'm 80, I'm sitting in the same shape you are. I mean, I don't feel like you've aged a day in the last 25 years.
Colors change on top,
That's about it.
Yeah.
What's the secret? What's the key to, being able to stay active and cognizant and sharp into your 80s?
Oh, read when you get the chance at night. Winters are long, and you don't stay out of the bars. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
I think that's something that,
Did you ever get wrapped into that?
No, never did.
Never did. Just never appealed to you.
No. My great grandfather was an alcoholic.
Okay.
And that kind of set my family off in a different course.
Gotcha.
And he was rolled for his money and killed in Seattle. And so that kind of changed the family. The kids in the family said, no, you don't want to get involved in that, So we never did. I mean, it just,
Yeah. I think pretty simple advice.
Just stay away from it,
Yeah.
And it's not good for your health.
Yep.
And there's a lot of things you don't have control over when you get in a car and start heading home. You think, oh, I'm going to drive good, Yeah, you can keep it between the ditches.
Yeah.
But somebody's going to get you eventually. I just say, if you're going to drink, boy, drink in moderation and watch what you're doing. I've seen more people, good people, lost that way.
Yeah.
Just because you get caught in a situation that you don't have control of.
Yep. Absolutely.
And, don't go around looking for fights and stuff, but, be sure you can finish one of it starts.
Yeah.
Or at least have enough sense to turn and get the heck out of there before it happens, I saw in the Navy a lot of times that happened, guys would go drinking and get in fights and stuff like that. And that's not the whole military. That's 10 to 15% of the fools.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of them aren't there.
Yeah.
Because they're out doing something with their families and having fun.
Well, that's true in the world too, right? There's always going to be that 10, 15%.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's so many advantages in the Navy. Like we could go to the special service and you go out deep sea fishing.
Yeah.
Why not do that? You go out and catch a marlin, bring it in, sell it.
That sounds like a way better time than getting punched in the face.
Yeah, geez, I know it. Yeah, just most of us are ugly enough anyway. You get rearranged. Be talking with no teeth, or at least you could take your teeth out at night and set them on the counter. But it's just just have fun. Think about what you're getting into, where you're headed.
Yep, for sure.
Stop and think about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And kids have just as many advantages, if not more, today. You can still go do the same things we did here. You don't have to follow the crowd.
Yeah.
And just working your thumbs all the time. There's some advantages to that, but put it down and go do some real things.
For sure.
Go do some real things. Challenge yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Be involved in sports.
Yep.
Yeah,
do hard things.
Yeah, and go camping with your friends. Join the Boy Scouts. I'm not kidding you.
Yeah.
I was Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, and I enjoyed it. I had a good time in high school.
Yep.
We went camping at least one weekend a month, and that was fun.
Yeah.
You're out there with your friends and getting abused by the weather and stuff, and you learn how to survive.
Absolutely. For sure.
Yeah.
Have you, are you very cognizant of diet? Have you ate one way or not as far as, food?
Growing up, we ate all stuff just off the farm. I mean, we didn't eat much out of the store. I haven't had a garden for a long time, but, we eat pretty moderately. Vegetables, meat, a lot of game meat.
A lot of wild game.
A lot of wild game.
Yep.
And a variety of stuff. I like fish. I like chicken. I like pheasant, like ducks. So you got a variety of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not all chemically raised.
It's pretty wild to know what's in a lot of the stores.
You don't want to know.
No.
Because everything's in it. There's nothing probably in the store that's natural.
Yeah.
I mean, from vegetables on up.
Yeah. Which can't be healthy in the long run.
Yeah, and just moderation, And like I say, stay off the drugs, the tobacco, and the alcohol.
Keep a clear mind.
That's it.
Yeah.
Just stay away from that stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's poisoning you.
It is.
I see all the guys I knew that have died, and the ones that all died young, with just a few natural selection things that happened. It was chemically induced.
And it's sad, too, when it could have been different.
Yeah, and we didn't have the drugs that they have now. That came on, probably about 10 or 12 years after I was in high school. That really caught on. Yeah. Back in the 70s.
Yeah, that was a big movement then.
Yeah, I mean, it was really too bad because it's poisoned. It's just poisoned the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about two-part question, advice for the younger generation and also advice for young people interested into getting into education? With 80 years old, you've got a lot of life experience, a lot of wisdom. If you could say something, to I have younger listeners that tune in, what would be a piece of advice there? And then also, if there's anyone listening that's looking to get into education, what would be a good piece of advice for them?
Yeah, as a young person, I'd say, listen to people. You don't have to follow their advice, but think about what you're doing. When you go to do something, say, did somebody tell me this wasn't a good idea? And look around at people and talk to people you admire. Talk to teachers. There's some teachers in your school that you like, and go talk to them. Your neighbors in your community. You can tell the difference between a jerkoid and somebody that's got something to offer.
Yeah.
And when you get out of school, start thinking about it when you're about a freshman or a sophomore. Don't wait till a year or two after and you made all your mistakes after you got out of high school. Kind of map out your future a little bit. And you can change your mind 100 times. That's all right.
Yep.
That's okay. But think about where you're going. Think about what you're doing. And take a look at the crowd that's around you. You don't have to follow them.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be out in front being a jerk to get them to follow you. If you're a reasonable, responsible person, you're going to have plenty of friends. And I don't care what you look like. You could be the ugliest guy in the world, and you're going to have more friends than the good-looking guy.
Yeah.
And just be kind to people. Help everybody out. If you see somebody and you can get off the road safely, you might pull off and see if you can give them a hand. Or maybe take them up the road with a gas can to get gas to get back on the road.
Yep.
And read a lot. Because you can go anywhere in the world sitting in a chair right there in your bedroom. You can have adventures all over the place. And what'll happen is you're going to find a series of books. And it might be old Capstick. you know, or somebody else. And you're going to have a bunch of adventures with them that you can't do now because the world's changed in the last 40 years.
Yeah.
But you can live their adventures, and you're going to start seeing you're going to have some of your own spun off of those things.
Yeah.
You know, and I just, whether it's in town or not, you can have adventures in cities too.
Yep.
I mean, it's not, we're kind of geared to the outdoors here, but there's a lot to do.
That's great advice.
If you be aware of what's going on around you, if you see something that doesn't look right starting to form up, go a different direction. You know, get out of there before you get caught in the trap that you can't get out of.
Yep.
Stay away from drugs, man. I'm not kidding you. That is, take them if the doctor prescribes them for the right reasons.
Yep.
They're good then, but don't just be experimenting with stuff just because somebody told you it felt good to be like that.
Yeah.
Because it's a crash coming to happen.
Yep.
And I think just map out your future a little bit. You're still in charge of it. Yeah, your folks might be telling you what to do, and that's their responsibility to see that you get a good start. You live long enough to get a good start. And look around you. Listen to your folks, because they probably made every mistake you're going to make.
For sure.
And you can avoid some of them and still have enough money to buy more fishing gear or buy a new car or have money to take the girl to the show on the weekend.
Yeah.
Because you didn't blow it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Yeah. And so what about for, young people interested in getting into education?
I think it's a really good thing. We need people there's so many good people that would be good educators that don't get in it. And you've heard stuff about, say, oh God, I wouldn't want to be a teacher. I know what a knothead I was and all the trouble I gave them. Well, not everybody can be a teacher. It's not something you can just go and do. You have to have a passion for it. If you want to be a teacher, get the education and try it. And you can use that education, even if you don't go into a classroom. In business, you could be an educator in business. You could be teaching corporation people, small places where there's only 5 or 6 employees. There's all kinds of teaching that can go on there because you can be reading journals and things like that and say, God, maybe we ought to try that. Seriously. And that's why I say read. And read adventure novels, read humor, read that sick guy named McManus, and see if you don't have tears in your eyes and your ribs ache the next day from laughing. But read a variety of things. Travel, if you get a chance to travel as much as you can. See as much of the country as you can, or the world as far as that goes. And you're going to have some good adventures. You're going to have some that are a little shaky, but you'll get through them, and you'll find out you got a lot to look back when you get to be an old guy and you can't get up the hill very fast anymore. You can sit on a stump and say, geez, I remember back in the day, Yeah. It's just fun. There's too much to do out there to just sit at home and watch TV.
Yep. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. That was good. That's spot on.
Well, I hope, some of what I learned passed on to other people,
I can attest and say that it has.
Okay,
for sure.
Yeah.
You've had such a huge impact, like I said, on myself, and then also all of my peers in that same age group. I don't really have the words to describe, the appreciation that we had for you and your class, and but I hope that on your side of the table, it feels good to know that you built a form of a legacy here with a lot of kids, over the 35 years or 40 years of being adventurous and doing hard things and this curiosity for the world. And to me, when I think of definition of teacher and impact, man, you hit it all. You checked all the boxes for us. And I'm so thankful. And I know I get to speak for everyone else, that you did that. Because you're so humble that you haven't spoke about all the behind the scenes stuff that had to go into, teaching us and the time outside the classroom. And, I think you always did it because it's what you wanted to do and you saw the value in it. And that's a good lesson that we also got to learn was just do the thing, but I guess just, in brief closing, like I just want to say, I appreciate you. I can't tell you how fortunate I feel that I get to be talking with you today, 20 years removed from being your 4th grade student, and knowing that you've had a huge impact of whatever small success I've had in my life. And I think that I hope that you get to look back on that with pride, that you had this little piece in all of us of what we're doing right now.
Well, I'm always humbled to hear somebody say, they took something away. And I remember old Al Noble and I, another outstanding teacher.
Absolutely.
He and I sitting out fishing or something, or waiting for ducks that never showed up. And, we talked about teaching a lot, and it was always positive.
Yeah.
Sure, there were some guys you would have liked to, reached over and taken a 2x4 and got them straightened out, but just the same, you saw those kids come around over time, and it was a joy.
Yeah.
It was really a joy. So we got back from you guys.
Wow.
We got probably more back from you guys than you got from us, but hopefully, to hear somebody enjoyed the time there and appreciated what we did, that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
You and Noble were two of the best and had lasting impressions on lots of us.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
He's also another name that's been mentioned frequently on this podcast.
Yeah, it's too bad he disappeared.
He's greatly missed.
Yeah, he was. He was a character.
Yeah.
Good guy, good sense of humor.
He was.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, anything in closing?
Stay safe. Think about what you do it before you do it.
Yep.
Have a good time and enjoy life and help people around you.
Cool.
Help people around you, whatever you do.
It's a great message, and thanks for coming on. This has been really good.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Josh.